It took 3 full hours of back roads and half a tank of gas to leave the city behind, but it was worth it. I didn't look in the rearview mirror once. The cottage sat on the edge of town, tucked into the curve of a wooded hill like it had been forgotten on purpose. The kind of place where time felt sticky, where you could hear your own heartbeat if you sat still long enough. Its white paint had dulled to the color of old bones, and ivy had crept its way up the porch columns like a slow invasion. I didn't mind. It was mine now. Or, at least, it was rented under my name for the foreseeable future. After the mess I left behind, after him, it felt like a clean slate. Like air after rain. The quiet was deafening at first. So pure it seemed unnatural. No neighbors screaming through thin apartment walls. No sirens cutting through the night. Just wind and the soft crackle of dry leaves and birds I didn't recognize. The stillness pressed in on me from all sides, but I welcomed it. The locals I encountered during the move were friendly in that practiced, polite way people can be when they don't really want to know you. They waved, but didn't ask questions. They offered smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. That suited me fine. I wasn't here to be known. The inside of the cottage was plain, but serviceable. Wooden floors that creaked in familiar, harmless ways. A tiny kitchen with mismatched cabinets. A fireplace that hadn't been used in years. There was a spare room with built-in shelves, perfect for my books, and a bedroom with tall, narrow windows that looked out into the trees. It had been furnished by the last tenant, or maybe the one before that. Everything had that gently worn quality, like furniture in a waiting room nobody cleaned thoroughly. One thing stood out, the television. It was old, not vintage, not retro chic. Just old. The kind with a thick, boxy frame and a screen that turned gray before it went black. Dust layered the top like it had been untouched for months. I found a remote tucked between the couch cushions. I didn't turn it on. The first day passed in a haze of boxes and quiet music. I organized books by instinct, let the kettle hiss for too long on the stove, forgot where I packed my socks. The house settled around me like a coat that didn't quite fit, but might in time. That first night, I fell asleep on the couch under a heavy blanket, lulled by the absolute silence. The next day came and went with more unpacking, more settling in. I scrubbed the bathroom tile until my fingers ached and opened every cabinet in the kitchen twice just to feel like I was doing something. The light here was different, less harsh. It pooled in the corners like water. I felt like I was floating through my own life. No one knew where I was, and that felt like safety. On the second night, I went to bed early. My body was sore in a good way, my mind quiet for the first time in weeks. The bedroom was cool and smelled faintly of cedar. I left the window cracked open to let the breeze in, and for a while, I just listened to the rustling leaves and the chirping insects and thought, maybe this place is going to fix me. I woke up at exactly 2:14 a.m. No grogginess, no confusión. My eyes were open, and I was awake all at once. Something had pulled me out of sleep, and I knew it before I even understood what it was. Static, that unmistakable hiss, soft and broken like the sound of a throat trying to speak underwater. It drifted in from the living room, low but constant, like a whisper that didn't know when to stop. For a moment, I didn't move. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling as the noise carved its way under the door. Then I slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway barefoot, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name. The TV was on. The screen glowed faintly, its flickering light bouncing off the walls. Just static, no picture, no sound but that endless hiss. The remote sat untouched on the coffee table. The plug was still in the outlet, wires undisturbed. I stood there for what felt like too long, just staring at the screen. It didn't make sense. I hadn't touched it since I arrived. Eventually, I switched it off and unplugged it for good measure. The screen dimmed to black. The living room fell quiet again, so quiet that my ears rang. I waited a few seconds longer, half expecting something, anything, to change. Nothing did. Back in bed, sleep didn't come as easily. I told myself it was faulty wiring, a quirk of the old house, a glitch in old technology. It wasn't a haunting. It wasn't anything. Still, I lay awake for a long time, eyes fixed on the dark ceiling, waiting for a sound that didn't come. In the morning, the TV was still off. The silence returned, but it didn't feel the same. It felt aware, like something in the house had been sleeping too, and now it wasn't. By the third night, I had convinced myself the first incident was a fluke, some weird leftover charge in the wires or a quirk of the house's ancient electrical system. But rational explanations don't hold up well when you're woken again at 3:11 a.m. by the same hissing noise, only louder this time, like the static was trying harder to be heard. The TV was on again, still unplugged. The first time, I hesitated before approaching it. The screen shimmered with that off-white grain, a swarm of electronic snow swirling endlessly. I stood in the doorway, spine pressed to the frame, watching. Nothing moved. Nothing changed, but something was different now. The sound wasn't just white noise. It was layered. There were patterns beneath the chaos, like voices whispering beneath a waterfall. Too many syllables to follow. Not quite words. Not quite not. I turned and left the room without touching it. Just shut the door and buried myself under the covers. Sleep never came. Each night after that, the static returned. Always at a different time. Always after I'd fallen asleep. I started keeping a log, writing down the times on the back of a grocery receipt I pinned to the fridge. First 2:14, then 3:11, then 1:38, then 4:02. No pattern, just persistence. It never failed to find me after my mind had let its guard down. I took extra steps, taped the plug to the wall with thick duct tape, set a heavy stack of books on top of the remote, tucked the batteries in a drawer on the opposite side of the room. I even flipped the couch to block the TV directly. None of it mattered. The screen came to life regardless. One night, I walked into the living room just past 3 a.m. and found the static had changed. It wasn't just white noise anymore. There was a shape in the middle of the screen. Faint at first, a shadow behind the fog. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. One of those optical illusions where the longer you stare, the more your mind fills in the blanks. But this wasn't that. The shape had edges, a vague suggestion of a head, a face. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It didn't react to my presence in any way. It just stared. I couldn't make out the features, not clearly, but the way it was framed, dead center on the screen, unmoving, was unmistakable. It was watching me. I stood frozen in the doorway for a long time, waiting for something to shift. Nothing did. Eventually, I yanked the plug from the wall and went back to bed. The next night, the face was back. This time closer, clearer, still grainy, still distorted by the static, but undeniably human. Pale, lips that didn't quite meet in the middle. Deep, empty eyes like burned-in shadows. I stared at it for so long my eyes began to sting, but it never changed. The static hissed around it like breath. By the end of the week, I stopped sleeping. Not by choice. I wanted to more than anything. But every time I started to drift, I could feel the screen humming in the next room. I'd wake with a jolt, pulse hammering in my neck, and know it was on again without having to check. The air in the house changed, became heavier, like something was always listening. I began hearing whispers during the day, soft, slow murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Like the house itself was exhaling thoughts. They would vanish the moment I turned toward them. Once, I stood in the hallway with my hand on the bedroom door, trying to build up the nerve to check if the screen was on again. And I heard my own name, whispered just beneath the level of recognition. So low it almost wasn't sound at all, like something had spoken it inside my skull. The face became a nightly presence, always a little closer, never blinking, never reacting. Its features sharpened with each visit, emerging slowly from the storm of static like it was swimming toward the screen. What I could see of its skin was sickly pale, almost gray, lips stretched too thin, eyes that looked wrong, too reflective like pools of still water. Not human, not really. I began keeping my phone beside me at night, hoping to record it. Maybe if I had proof, I could send it to someone. Make it real. The night I finally did, I crept out to the living room just after 2 a.m. The screen was glowing. The face was there, still as ever. My hands trembled as I hit record. I stood a few feet back, capturing everything. The unplugged cord, the stack of books still resting on the remote, the expressionless figure on the screen. I recorded for nearly a full minute, then crept back to the bedroom, heart jackhammering against my ribs. It took hours to fall asleep. The next morning, with daylight pouring weakly through the windows, I opened my phone, found the video, and hit play. What I saw wasn't what I'd filmed. It wasn't the TV. It wasn't the face. It was me, lying on the couch, asleep, eyes closed, the living room dim and empty. The unplugged TV sat in the background, lifeless and still. But I wasn't holding the phone. It was positioned across the room, like someone had propped it on a shelf. I watched myself shift under the blanket, murmur something inaudible, then fall still again. I scrubbed through the clip, frame by frame. No static, no screen glow, no face, just me, caught mid-dream, surrounded by silence. I checked the rest of my phone, the photo album, the videos folder. Every single recording was like that. Me asleep, viewed from impossible angles. There were 4 of them now. I hadn't filmed any of them. Not consciously. I don't know what scared me more, that I couldn't remember recording those videos, or that I hadn't been alone when they were taken. That night, I slept with the phone under my pillow. That night, the static returned. That night, I didn't check the screen. And still, in the morning, there was a new video. There comes a point where fear stops being sharp. It dulls into something heavy and constant, something that just presses against your chest until you forget what it was like to breathe without it. I reached that point somewhere around night 12. Sleep had become something I remembered from another life. My limbs were heavy all the time, and my thoughts dragged like wet cloth through mud. I lost track of days. Time felt warped inside the house, as if I were walking through syrup, each hour stretching longer than it should, but still slipping away before I could hold on to it. I watched the shadows in the room shift in slow motion. I started keeping the lights on all day and night. I stopped using lamps that gave off too much static. When I finally admitted to myself that I couldn't fix this, that this was more than faulty wiring or sleep deprivation or grief from the breakup, I made the decision to leave. I listed the house for sale, took photos in the early morning light when it felt the most normal, when the air was less oppressive. I typed out a short description: cozy cottage, quiet town, wooded charm, and sent it to 3 real estate sites. The internet blinked out the moment I hit send. Just went black. My laptop restarted itself, flashing a brief image before rebooting. A single frame. It showed the hallway mirror. The reflection inside, it wasn't mine. I shut the laptop and didn't touch it for the rest of the day. Still, I tried to make the calls. I wanted someone to help, even if it meant explaining the impossible. But no call would go through. I had service, full bars, but every number I dialed cut out or redirected. I once heard my own voice echo back at me in the middle of a voicemail, saying words I never said. Then came the emails. I sent one to a friend I hadn't spoken to in months, a desperate ramble about static and faces and dreams that weren't mine. It bounced back in seconds. Address does not exist. I triple-checked the spelling. It was correct. I tried again. Same response. I tried sending it to my own email. Nothing arrived. The car didn't start the next day. The keys turned. The dashboard lit up, but the engine refused to catch. I walked out and opened the hood, even though I knew nothing about engines. Everything inside looked fine. Then the radio clicked on. It was static. I slammed the door and walked back inside without looking behind me. That evening, I nailed the TV cabinet shut. Not just shut, sealed. Screws, nails, a thick metal chain I found in the shed. I wrapped it like a lock around the doors, looped it through the handles, made knots I couldn't untie even if I wanted to. The screen was dark when I left it. I unplugged everything again, removed the batteries from the remote, locked the cabinet door with a padlock I hadn't touched since moving in. I pushed the couch back in front of it, dragged a table from the kitchen to add more weight. It felt final, like I had contained something. That night, I actually slept, but I woke up freezing. Not cold, freezing. My breath fogged the air above me, like I'd left the window open, but the glass was shut tight. I was lying in bed, blankets twisted around my legs. My skin felt damp. I sat up slowly, muscles aching, heart already beginning to pound because something fell off. The house was silent in that horrible, humming way again. And then I saw it. The TV. It was in my bedroom, sitting directly across from my bed on top of the old dresser, screen dark, power cord trailing nowhere. It shouldn't have been there. I never brought it there. I had locked it up, chained it, blocked it. But there it was. And on the screen, faint but visible, a face. My face, eyes open, watching me. I stumbled backward, nearly fell out of bed. When I looked again, the screen was blank. Just black. Not even a reflection. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I covered every screen in the house. My phone, the laptop, even a microwave's little digital panel. I draped them with towels, bed sheets, jackets, the mirrors too. Anything with a reflection. Anything that could show me something that wasn't mine. I couldn't risk seeing it again. But even then, it found ways through. My phone lit up once when I picked it up, even with the towel still on it. I swore I saw the face again, just a flash. Enough to make my stomach flip. A smear of skin, something like teeth. It was getting bolder. Once, while rinsing a dish, I looked down into the shallow pool of water in the sink and saw the faint shimmer of static ripple across the surface. Just a flicker, but I dropped the plate anyway. The house didn't want me to leave. I knew that now. The longer I stayed, the more it wrapped itself around me. Familiar creaks in the floor began happening when I wasn't moving. Shadows moved in corners where light didn't touch. My name echoed from places I hadn't been in hours. I was unraveling, and it was watching. Eventually, while fumbling with the breaker box to kill power to the entire house, I found something hidden behind it. Wedged between the wires, behind a loose metal plate, was a scrap of something brittle. Paper, maybe. I pulled it out carefully. It crumbled at the edges. It was a postcard. Torn, weathered, stained with something brown that might have been rust, or maybe worse. The front had once shown a bright yellow field, cartoonish flowers dotting the bottom. On the back, scrawled in fading red ink, were words. The letters were jagged, hurried, barely legible. The face comes closer the more you look. Don't fall asleep near it. Don't dream of it. It likes when you dream. That was all. No signature. No address. No explanation. I reread it so many times I could recite it by memory. And I understood, finally, why it always waited until I fell asleep. Why it never moved when I stared too long. It was patient. It needed me to let go. It wanted to be closer. And I had been helping it all along. It grinned. That's what broke me. Not the whispers, not the endless static, not even seeing myself asleep on a screen I never touched. The moment the face smiled, slowly, deliberately, like it had been waiting for me to notice, I lost whatever grip I had left on the idea that this could still be explained. It was no longer a glitch. It was no longer confined to glass or electronics. It knew me. It knew the exact expression that would tip the balance. The corners of its mouth curled too high, as if it had studied humans but hadn't quite gotten the ratios right. The skin creased unnaturally. The teeth weren't crooked or yellow or monstrous. They were just wrong. Too flat. Too uniform. Like they had been printed, not grown. I watched its lips split into that smile for 10 full seconds before I fled the room and left every light in the house blazing. I didn't go back in. I stayed in the kitchen with my back against the wall until morning. And that morning, I was done. I packed everything I could fit into 2 bags, essentials only. No phone, no laptop, no screens, just clothing, toiletries, the ripped postcard tucked deep into a side pocket like some sort of talisman. The face hadn't appeared again after that grin, but I didn't need it to. That moment burned into me like a brand. I booked the closest hotel I could find, a roadside place 20 minutes out of town. No reviews. Didn't care. The moment the reservation was confirmed, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. It was almost too easy. Nothing resisted. No crashin de bicis. No lost power. Even the car started on the first try, like it had been waiting for me to stop pretending. The TV didn't turn on. The mirrors stayed dull and empty. No whispers curled through the vents. No shadows crawled beneath the doors. The house let me go, but the hotel wasn't available until the next afternoon. One more night. Just one. I kept telling myself that. One more night. I could survive that. I emptied my bags again. Not because I intended to unpack, but because the silence in the house felt so strange now, so complete, that I had to fill it with something. even if it was the rustling of fabric against carpet. Every drawer I opened felt like a ritual. Every zipper echoed too loud. The usual dread, I felt stepping into the hallway or catching movement in the corner of my eye was gone. And with that came a strange, floating relief. I had won. I was leaving. The house had released its grip. For the first time in ages, I allowed myself to believe it was over. By the time night fell, there was still no sign of the face. No te ubiglo. No static hum clawing at the edges of hearing. No dreams. Not even flickers. The house was just a house again. That should have comforted me. But the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow, like something had been ripped away, leaving an absence too large for the space. The silence wasn't clean, it was smothering. There was no air in it, no life, just an endless, invisible pressure that grew heavier the darker the sky became. It wasn't the same quiet I had craved when I first arrived. It was missing something that had been here all along. And now, without it, the house fell off in a different way. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, listening to the walls breathe. The clock blinked slowly beside me, the numbers turning over one by one. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. I kept the lights on, of course, but they didn't flicker anymore. They just glowed, stable and still. There was no danger. I kept repeating that. The fear was gone. Still, I couldn't sleep. I tried reading, but the words wouldn't stick. My mind wouldn't focus. I kept glancing toward the unplugged TV, still sealed in a cabinet in the living room, behind a fortress of furniture I hadn't touched. I didn't need a check. I knew it was off. I hadn't seen the face in over 24 hours. I should have felt safe. But my skin itched. My teeth ached. My pulse fluttered in my throat like a bird trapped beneath floorboards. Eventually, somewhere around 3 a.m., my body gave in. I curled under the blanket, exhausted beyond thought, nerves buzzing. Sleep hovered just out of reach like it was teasing me. I drifted into that half state, where dreams begin to bleed into the real world, and your body becomes something foreign. And then it happened. At 3:13 a.m., exactly, though I never looked at the clock, I felt it. Fingers, cold, impossibly cold, wrapping around my wrist like vines rising from a frozen lake. It wasn't the brush of fabric or the twitch of a dream. It was contact, pressure, real, alive. I didn't move at first, didn't dare. The sensation crawled up my arm like frostbite, numbing everything in its path. My eyelids fluttered, and even before they opened, I knew I wasn't alone. There was no static. The TV was still off, but something was beside me, not standing, not watching from across the room, not reflected in a screen or trapped in glass. It was there, right next to me, breathing, not loud, not ragged, but steady, slow, like it had all the time in the world. I opened my eyes. The room looked the same. The lamp hummed softly beside the bed. The furniture was still unmoved. But there, just beyond the edge of the blanket, something pressed down on the mattress. A shape, indistinct, colorless, but solid. A presence. I couldn't look directly at it. Something in me refused, but I could feel it. Its outline, its size, the cold that radiated off it. And most terrifying of all, the knowing. It knew I was awake. It had waited for this moment, not to show itself, not to frighten, but to be felt, to be real for once. No screens, no distortion, no interference, just touch. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the ceiling and waited. Eventually, the pressure on my wrist faded. The cold seeped back into nothingness, and the shape beside me disappeared. But I didn't sleep again. I never closed my eyes, because even with the TV off, the face had finally left the screen. And I think now, it had always wanted more than just to be seen. It had wanted in, and I had finally let it get close enough to find the way. She didn't scream. She wanted to. Every muscle in her body begged to jolt upright, to flee the bed and crash through a window if she had to. But nothing moved. The cold around her wrist had vanished, but in its place was something far worse. A shape, just at the edge of the mattress, sitting, watching. The outline was slight, barely there in the shadows, like a smudge of breath left too long on a mirror. But it was there, not mist, not imagination. It had mass, It depressed the edge of the bed with the weight of a person. She could feel it down to the springs below her spine. She lay frozen, limbs heavy and distant, breath shallow. Her eyes strained against the dark. The lamplight she'd left on had been snuffed out. She didn't know when or how, and she didn't dare reach to turn it back on. Her phone lay on the nightstand, inches from her hand. She turned her head, barely, and reached. The screen stayed black, unresponsive. The flashlight beside it refused to flicker. The batteries were fresh. She remembered changing them that morning. But now it may as well have been a paperweight. The dark had swallowed everything except the awareness of what sat just beyond her reach. She stared at it without looking, felt its eyes on her face, knew in the marrow of her bones that if she moved, if she acknowledged it, it would lean closer. It would show her the rest of its face, the part the static had never revealed. And that would be worse than death. So she lay there, in silence, for hours. The room stretched out of time, locked in some liminal space between sleep and waking, between what she knew and what should never be known. Outside, the world continued, unaware, unconcerned. At some point, without realizing it, her eyes drifted shut, not from sleep, but from exhaustion. When they opened again, a faint blue haze was beginning to seep through the curtains. Morning. Pale, weak dawn. The cold had lifted. The shape was gone. The bed beside her no longer bore the impression. The air had lost its weight. The silence had changed again, no longer charged, no longer waiting. She sat up slowly. Her body ached from hours of tension. Her fingers tingled with pins and needles. The lamp flicked on with a hesitant click. She didn't look around the room. She knew better than to search for it. Whatever it was, it hadn't needed her eyes to see her. The wrist it had touched still burned with cold. When she rolled up the sleeve of her sweatshirt, she found a mark. Faint, smudged, like ash pressed into skin and then wiped mostly away. Not a bruise, not a cut, just a stain. Dark gray, shaped like a thumbprint, with smaller shadowy blotches around it, like fingers had wrapped around the joint and held on too long. She washed it 3 times. It didn't fade. She didn't bother packing. She left everything in the house, took only the bag she had prepared, and drove away without locking the door. No glances back, no final walkthrough. The cottage receded in the rear view like a memory that never quite belonged to her. The hotel room she checked into was sterile and quiet and full of natural light. No TV, no meters. Her first full night of sleep felt like coming back from the dead. She didn't dream. In the days that followed, she changed her number, closed her email, scrubbed her online presence clean. She didn't talk about the house, didn't write reviews, didn't share stories. It felt like naming it would invite it back. For a while, things were okay. The ash mark on her wrist faded, but never fully disappeared. Some nights, she would stare at it in the mirror, tilting her arm to the light, trying to convince herself it had been a hallucination. But part of her already knew what had touched her hadn't needed a screen anymore. It had crossed something, stepped through. It had learned. Weeks passed. The sky began to shift into spring. She started walking again, going outside, speaking with people like she was part of the world again. And then one night, her phone buzzed. A message from an old friend, someone she hadn't spoken to in months. They were traveling, staying in a little Airbnb a few towns over. They sent a video of the rental, a quaint cottage with exposed beams and a fireplace. Cozy, warm, unassuming. The video panned slowly across the room. It paused briefly on the large front window, where soft daylight poured in and bounced off the glass. She almost didn't notice it, but then she did. In the reflection, at the very back of the room, behind her friend, standing just behind the camera. The same face. Pale, still, watching. Its mouth hadn't moved, but its eyes had. They were looking directly at her. Not at her friend, not at the phone, at her. Across time, across glass, across wherever it had come from. It had followed, not through the cords, not through the screens. It had come through her. She turned off the phone and left it on the nightstand, screen down. She hasn't picked it up since. She doesn't need to, because the moment she closes her eyes now, she sees it. No static, no distortion, just the face and the smile in those eyes. She used to think the TV was haunted. Now she knows. She was never the one watching.